All right. So without further ado, this was a special last minute guest edition. We have General Roger Teague with us today. We're really excited for him to be here too. So I'm going to kind of kick us off, and we're just going to introduce this lovely panel. I'm Kelly from Republic. Thank you guys all so much for joining. I'm a marketing director here, and I am joined by Marc Bell, Cody Willard, and General Roger Teague. And we're going to be talking about, satellites and defense solutions and the conflict in Ukraine and investing in all of that good stuff. So I'd love to first kick it off to Marc to just give a quick intro to himself. And yeah.
Sure. Listen, thank you very much for having us today. We are thrilled to be here. And my name is Marc Bell. I'm chairman and CEO of a defense company called Terran Orbital. And what we do is we solve problems from space for the DoD and the IC community. And that has been our mission now for almost 10 years. And we're in the process of merging into a SPAC called Tailwind 2, symbols TWNT on the New York Stock Exchange. And that is happening at the end of this month. So we're pretty excited. And, we are probably one of the largest providers of manufacturers of small sats here in the country. And we're the guys who invented the CubeSat. It was invented by a guy named Dr. Jordi Pugswari and Bob Twiggs. Jordi had a company called Tyvak where he did this, and we acquired Tyvak in 2013. So all these new space companies you keep hearing about really were built off the technology that we created here at Tyvak. And with that, I'll let Roger, will you introduce yourself?
You bet. Thank you very much, Marc. Good morning, everyone. My name is Roger Teague, 35 years in the aerospace and defense business, 31 years serving in our United States Air Force. I retired back in 2017 as a major general. And then I worked for another 2.5 years as the vice president of space intelligence and missile defense for the Boeing company. And then in January of 2020, I was fortunate to be able to hook up with Marc and have been joined and working hard to bring Terran Orbital and feel the great capabilities that Terran Orbital is going to be able to provide here in this critical time. So again, look forward to the discussion here today, but back over to you, Kelly.
Thanks. I'd love for Cody, I'll kick it right back over to Cody to introduce himself and his bio.
Cody Willard, full-time job is hedge fund managing. I also write about all of the trades and analysis that I do. You can find that at tradingwithcody.com. And I'm also the founder of a space debris cleaning cryptocurrency. We'll probably hit on that a little bit later, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, as we delve into space. My hedge fund is an investor in SpaceX, relativity space, several privately held space companies, as well as Rocket Lab and a few publicly traded space companies that I have started buying. And I do think that over the next 5 to 10 years, the space revolution is probably the single clearest, most obvious multi-trillion-dollar economy that is about to be embarked upon in our world, in our entire galaxy. I guess it's not just a planet over anymore.
Thank you for that, Cody. We're going to dive into that even more in a few minutes, but just to kick us off, I think it would be remiss if we did not kind of talk about Ukraine. And this webinar was actually planned a few weeks ago before things kind of the everything rapidly changed, and so we kind of pivoted to discuss this and to bring that to the forefront. And Republic's going to be doing some things next week, so keep an eye out on social and email, and we'll be sharing how we're kind of getting involved. But today we're definitely going to take a lens and look into that and how space and satellites and defense solutions and the conflict in Ukraine work together. So before we dive into some of those kind of complex topics, I'm going to ask if we can kind of start off with the basics. I'd love to hear some of your perspectives on what opportunities currently exist in space and what both or all of you are excited about. I'd love to pass it to Cody first, because I know you had some really interesting insights, and just kick us off with kind of what you were just talking about
Sure.
around this space revolution.
So you can even sort of think of it a little bit like the smartphone revolution. Over time, over decades, the semiconductor chips and the software got so advanced and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And what's happening with space is the platform is getting us up there. And the cost to get to launch, to get things into space, CubeSats or big satellites or human beings, is dropping towards de minimis levels. Over the last 10, 20 years, the prices are down 90, more than 95% to get something up in space. It will continue to drop. It will drop another 95% over the next 5 years, and it will be not free, but compared to what we are accustomed to, it will be basically free to travel or to send things into space, say 10 years from now. And that gives you an entire platform then to build all these different kinds of services and applications that can then be built in space. And, we can again go back to the smartphone revolution. And I wasn't smart enough to know that people would create apps that I would be able to find my dog down the street because of GPS satellite positioning combined with my smartphone. But there were people smart enough to do that. And I knew 10 years ago that, yes, you unleash the entrepreneurial spirits of the people that have a platform that can reach billions of people, and you end up with trillion-dollar economies. Apple, Google, and many apps do that now. This is the next phase. Over the next 5 or 10 years, there will be new services that I don't conceive of, you haven't thought of. But just for an example, if you want to go to the Kentucky Derby or the Super Bowl, instead of holding your smartphone up during the greatest moments of the event, you will tell, hey, Siri, use the satellite technology around me and the 5G stuff everywhere to create a video feed from my perspective where I'm standing watching this. That type of stuff will happen in 5 or 10 years, maybe even sooner. There will be great ideas and concepts. Oh, look, Siri heard me. It's recording everything I said. At any rate, the space revolution will become a multi-trillion-dollar economy. We're probably just now in the top of the first inning. Let's not get crazy. It's going to be a long ride to get to where we're going. It will take years for these valuations to truly come to play, but you will have multi-trillion-dollar companies that are space-centric 10 years from now.
Yeah. Mark, I'd love to, yeah.
It's funny.
No, I'd love to pass it over to you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because about 10 years ago, I was over at SpaceX and we were talking about their big rockets and how my iPhone is more computing power than the space shuttle. But I had an idea. I was at the Milken conference and had this idea, and I called it the ultimate selfie. And it was, what I wanted to do was build a constellation of satellites that when I'm at the football game, I could look up, take a selfie of me and have that image of me sitting in my seat texted to my phone. I mean, who wouldn't pay 99 cents for that wherever they go?
Well, it's going to be, you know how this works, though. You won't even pay for it. It'll be ad supported. They'll track everything you do. and then you'll be able to get that selfie for free. You won't even have to pay.
Okay. But then we realized how much it would cost to build it. And I said, well, I got to find a way to make more money, so I can afford to make my ultimate selfie. And that's how we ended up in this business. And but people talk about, you hear everyone's fascinated with launch. SpaceX, Rocket Lab, all these space rocket startups, everybody's fascinated with it. And SpaceX really revolutionized it because they lowered the cost of launch to where it became affordable for anybody really to put a satellite into space. But nobody talks about, you hear the government talks about 50,000 satellites are going to be launched over the next 10 years. That's an enormous amount of satellites compared to what's in orbit today. But nobody talks about who's going to build them. And we are the last independent manufacturer of small sats here in the United States. So that somebody's going to be someone like us. And we are rapidly building out our capabilities so we can go ahead and build thousands of satellites a year to meet the demand for all these great ideas from space, and great ideas both for commercial and civil, being so like NASA, but also for the DoD and the IC community, for the military. As we're seeing with Ukraine today, how important that is from space, having ISR capabilities that unfortunately Ukraine didn't have before this conflict.
You're going to need to tell everyone what ISR. You used DoD earlier, assuming everyone knows what Department of Defense is too, by the way. But do tell.
I'll let Roger simplify it for me.
Well, thanks, Mark. Again, ISR specifically stands for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. But in essence, it's the ability to see and understand what's going on around you in every medium, whether it's sea, land, air, or space. It's critically important to be able to surveil and consistently monitor exactly what's going on around you, what the enemy might be doing. What you really want to be able to do is be able to intercept and or be able to understand exactly what's going on so that you can prepare accordingly and get that information into decision makers' hands and that they can correspondingly make decisions and take actions that might otherwise lead to, a different outcome and be able to, if you'll counter what an enemy might be planning or strategizing to do. So it's critically important that we have surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities. This is nothing new, but when you start bringing this into the space domain and fielding large, persistent constellations of satellites that can see literally the Earth anywhere, anytime, it becomes of tremendous value to warfighting commanders. And I think that's a critical difference and a critical enabler, frankly, a huge differentiator that Terran Orbital is specifically bringing to the aerospace and defense market.
Can I add, if I could, real quick, that we're talking about defense and stuff, but as you talk about that, one of the things I want to remind people is that this is not space revolution, and we are going to talk about Ukraine and defense and why it's so important today, but it's also about feeding the world and solving world hunger, creating better lives for all of us, whether you're the middle class or the lower class or the upper class, wherever your economic regime might be. It's about creating new things. And when you talk about, real-time surveillance and being able to see things, like farmers will be able to manage crops better. And we don't know all the different ways that people will be able to use cheap satellites that we can send up cheaply, and better lasers, better heat imagery, better whatever the different technologies we keep putting on these small satellites that Terran can build and send out into space, build constellations that do all of these incredible things. It's not just about tourism or defense. This is that was a good catch shot right there. You're lucky it didn't hit the keyboard.
What? I have no idea what you guys are talking
about. Didn't need a space video feed to see that one.
That was a lot. Cody, I would love for you to continue. And I'm also curious if anyone can kind of touch on, we've talked a lot about how this technology is changing from the last 20 years to these newer satellites that are coming out. Could anyone touch a little bit on that?
Companies like Maxar or Telesat, Iridium, some of these companies, most older satellite companies, have billions of dollars sunk into their old satellites, and it costs them hundreds of millions of dollars to get those satellites up into space. You've got an entirely disruptive business model now where Terran Orbital or others can actually build satellites that are much more capable than the satellites that were sent up 10 or 20 years ago at 1/100th or 1/10th of the cost of those older satellites, gets them up into space at 1/100th of the cost that it took to get something up into space 20 years ago. And so you've got an entire satellite revolution that is building right here, right now. I'll shut up now. Please take it away, Mark and/or General Teague.
So think about it a few different ways. What used to cost $1 billion to build and take 10 years to make now costs $10 million to build and takes 12 to 24 months to make. So the cost has gone down and the functionality has gone up. We could do more with less faster than it could be done before. So a customer comes to us with a solution, with a problem, and we give them a solution from space. So currently, we build constellations for other people, and then we will be building one of our own. But that was also an example of a customer coming to us with a solution we're solving from space. But the solution was that we build it, but we build everything. So we build 5G, like phones, Internet of Things, internet from space. We build what's called electro-optical imaging, which is photography from space, taking pictures of the Earth. we build a technology called SAR, synthetic aperture radar, which was a technology that it was the domain of militaries and governments the past 50 years. We're finally commercializing it. And Roger, why don't you talk for 2 seconds about SAR?
You bet, Mark. SAR allows you to SAR the technology. It's radar imaging from space, but it allows you not only to see, surveil large sections of the Earth at any one time, but most importantly is it's day-night and all weather. Typical electro-optical, if you will, camera can only capture imagery when it's under sunlit conditions. And so when half the Earth is covered in darkness, it's limited already. And then the other of the half that is sunlit at any one time, at least half of it is typically covered in clouds. And so your business model from a business perspective, your ability to collect images gets severely restricted very fast. SAR solves that problem. SAR allows you to see day, night, through clouds, through storms and whatnot ever, and really surveil the Earth at any one time. And Cody, I think you really hit the nail right on the head. And the attractiveness of the price point, and being able to then at that price point and at the those launch. The reduced cost of launch, it allows you to field large constellations of these types of capabilities to surveil the entire Earth with single-digit minute kind of revisit rates, i.e. having a persistent eye on any area of the Earth as needed. And that becomes incredibly valuable.
So, and if you think of what's going on in the Ukraine today, most activity that the Russians are doing, they're doing at night, or they're doing when it's bad weather, because they know the majority of satellites in orbit today are the ones that take pretty pictures like you see on the Google Earth of your home. It needs a clear sunny day, the sun's got to be shining, no cloud cover to take a picture. And they know that. But with SAR, we could see through the clouds, we could see at night, so they can't hide. And knowledge is power. And that is, that's one of the things that's very important for people to realize. It's all the things that don't happen in this world because the US government has all this knowledge from space in order to prevent things from happening before they happen.
Out of curiosity, does SAR penetrate ocean? Can it see submarines moving around in the Black Sea or?
The known applications, and it really depends upon, there are certainly capabilities that SAR can do with regard to depending upon the application and how you specifically refine the wavelength associated with it, and how you're trying to apply it against a particular material or object.
So not necessarily,
as an example,
but they are.
To your point, we can detect soil, the moisture in soil content, right? So I can understand, hey, how that might then affect crop yield in a particular area at any one time, as an agricultural example. That's tremendously valuable information. And so it depends upon the object that's being surveilled and how you're ultimately applying. But there's a lot of different uses.
I'm glad you brought up the food supply part again, because again, in my mind, when I picture how do satellites help farmers better yields, it's not just imagery. It is soil moisture content. It is, and again, that's where I'm not smart enough to have thought about the fact that we could send satellites that have some sort of technology that allows farmers to know that they need to water better in that one part of the field and less on the other part of the field. But someone was, and that's the stuff that's going to be over the next 5 or 10 years that we don't know how all the different incredible services and applications that SAR will itself enable.
It's also things like helping with global warming. We can monitor ice flows, monitor how when icebergs break off, when you have the oceans are rising, because we can see the depths of things. It's very important to have your data. Not like I said earlier, knowledge is power, and all different kinds of things you can image with SAR. You can then use that data to solve problems, real world problems today here on Earth.
Mark, would you mind kind of pivoting and kind of talking about how that powerful SAR technology and some of the work that you're doing in the Ukraine right now is happening kind of live?
So we're lucky enough that we own some of our own satellites that do different things. We've never publicized it. We've actually never spoken about it before until today. We watch a lot of the people out there going and putting images to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and sending it to CNN, but that's not helping the Ukrainians. People realize when you send them those images, the Russians watch CNN too. You're not helping them because they're just going to move. The second they see that picture, if they're smart, they're just going to move away, and they're not helping the Ukrainians. The goal is to give the Ukrainians data and knowledge and support and help to maintain democracy in Europe. And it's great how the world's really coming together to support them. And but we support them by helping them, providing them data and information that can be useful to them to protect themselves.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, let's continue to talk a little bit more about these use cases and implications. So you talked a little bit about the 50,000 satellites that are going to be put into orbit. We read that quote was from the Space Development Agency's website that said analysts predicted that for 50,000 new satellites in the next 10 years. Cody, would you mind kind of kicking us off and talking about like what's wrong with those satellites now and how you see the use cases for these satellites now, and maybe touching a little bit, I think this was new to me when I first started talking to you guys, the difference between these low orbit multi-satellite constellations versus the older, larger satellites.
Yeah, sure. So as Mark mentioned earlier, the CubeSat, small satellites. I mean, the way I almost try to picture it is sending a computer server up into space. Instead of putting it in a server farm, you send it up into space. And what you put on that computer, like a computer here on Earth, you can put all kinds of different chipsets and software sets in there and communicate with it and talk to it and even, update it like you do your Tesla over the air. But that certainly wasn't the case, 10 or even 20 years ago, or even the giant satellites that NASA sends out to go observe Mars or other satellite solar systems. Those things are giant building size, and the technology, as Mark mentioned earlier, it's almost decades. It was decades in the making to get these giant NASA satellites up. Whereas, you could be a university right now, and you've got a satellite, a space division at your university, and you guys have got these ideas of, again, I'm not smart enough to know the great applications, but someone at a university is sitting there like, why wouldn't we from space do this? And they contact Terran and they're like, hey, we need to build a satellite that does this cool stuff and uses lasers and SAR and microwaves and heat imagery plus video feeds. And it's got algorithms that tie into some server farms that we partnered with Amazon Web Services to tie it all in together. And Starlink is going to make it all work even faster than it used to. And suddenly you're not even like, space just becomes another facet of our economy and of the technology revolution and the internet revolution, the app revolution, the smartphone revolution, it's smart glasses revolution, the smart eyeball revolution, the chipsets inside of your body in 5 or 10 years. But that's another topic entirely. Fact of the matter is 50,000 satellites will be up in the air. There is going to be new technologies and new services that we haven't even thought of yet. And the technologies themselves, the costs drop, and getting those satellites up there gets cheaper. And the United States needs to be first. Otherwise, China and Russia will own the, you also asked low Earth orbit versus higher Earth orbit. The low Earth orbit is where Starlink and these other satellites are focused. And if we don't build satellite constellations in low Earth orbit, China will. And someone's got to get there first. We still need to get to space debris and space junk and how that is the single biggest impediment to any of this working. And I do have a solution, sktls.com, skittles.com. It's free. There are no founders tokens. It is a cryptocurrency 100% dedicated to cleaning up space debris
Yeah,
So
sounds like there's a lot to cover.
it's funny
Go for it, Mark.
you say when you're talking about space debris, we obviously live that nightmare every day, and it's a tremendous issue out there. And what we're designing our next generation of satellites have similar to what airplanes have today. They have something called a TCAS, so traffic collision avoidance system. And so we're building that into satellites where they'll move out of the way of debris. And we also build satellites which do what's called space situational awareness. So we're mapping debris in space in real time. But there really needs to be a solution on how to get rid of that debris and bring it down to Earth. And it's very irresponsible how these foreign governments are blowing things up in space to prove a point and to flex their muscles per se. But they're creating hazards for everybody, not just for ourselves, but everybody out there they're creating hazards for. And then governments need to be more responsible and how we work. It's not just LEO, it's middle Earth orbit, it's geosynchronous orbit. You have all these satellites out there that are being affected by all this junk in space. And there's a great website called stuffin.space where you get to see all this junk live and where it's flying around the Earth. And they do a really great job of seeing it. You can click on a piece of junk, it tells you when it was launched and who's responsible for it. And people got to clean up their own mess. The great thing about what we build is all our satellites, we laugh, it's sustainability in space. And it truly is. All of our satellites are designed to deorbit on their own when their lifespan is over. So they all go ahead and come into the atmosphere, they burn up, turn into water vapor, and we leave a zero footprint behind in space. So
the only issue being that if one of those bolts or pieces of specks of dust are flying around at 17,000 miles per hour in orbit, in low Earth orbit, were to hit one of those satellites, it changes the trajectory. And you hopefully, right then, Mark, it would still end up falling towards the atmosphere, but no guarantees when it hits space junk.
But the great part about building these constellations we're building now of hundreds of satellites is if one satellite gets knocked out of orbit, there's lots of redundancy built into the constellation. Where it used to be, you built one satellite, put it up 43,000 miles in geosynchronous, and spent billions of dollars on it. And if that gets hit, you're in deep trouble. Now it's like if one gets knocked out, it's okay. We keep going. And that's the beauty of it. Look at Starlink. They had 40 satellites get caught in a solar wind. And you know what? He just keeps going. And it's okay. It's a cost of doing business. And because he's still building a constellation that would have cost hundreds of billions of dollars years ago, that now it's costing millions of dollars. Roger, you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I was just going to pick up on the point that Cody mentioned with regard specifically to the specific intent of the Space Development Agency and the need and desire, frankly, intent of the U.S. national security space community and our government to drive resiliency into our space architectures. General John Hyten, former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, used to remark and talk to some of our satellite capabilities as big, fat, juicy targets in space. They represent a strategic vulnerability. And frankly, that is the impetus behind the Space Development Agency's intent to drive large constellations, proliferated constellations of satellites, if you will, to disaggregate and to disperse our capabilities and provide them across many layers and functioning missions across many layers, if you will, hundreds and even thousands of satellites performing rather than just one or two or X number of bigger satellites performing those same missions. Again, go ahead, Cody.
Well, General, I actually had a question on this very topic. What, as the tensions with Russia escalate and, space, Roscosmos is talking about not sending rockets to, or that NASA might use things. There's already starting to be some tensions with the space programs between the United States and Russia, clearly. And I mean, that's sort of fait accompli at this point, right? What are the risks that Russia targets our satellite systems and that they have the capability of doing such? And thereby, how bad would it, can you frame just how nightmarish are even just like trying to buy something off of Amazon, much less the defense systems in the United States being able to work? if Russia were to actually actively target our satellite systems in space?
Well, even more to the point, it's our very economy. It's our national way of life. In fact, around the world, so many systems and capabilities are fundamentally reliant on space and space capabilities. You mentioned early in the broadcast here, Cody, the critical importance of GPS. Not only for precision navigation, but more important for precision timing. Every banking transaction that you perform, every time you swipe your credit card, has a precision time allocated to that specific transaction, and it has to sync up exactly correct, or it won't go through. And so everything would grind to a halt very, very quickly if it were not for the space capabilities that we have deployed and frankly are very, very dependent upon. To your earlier question, I would just remark that both the Chinese and the Russians have demonstrated on-orbit space capabilities, anti-satellite space capabilities. The Chinese blew up one of their own weather satellites back in 2007. Frankly, that got our attention and was the impetus that said, you know what, we've got to start rethinking our space architectures. And hence, that created the wave towards ultimately our nation going after and supporting large constellations, as I've described earlier. But I think you've seen a huge shift in momentum at the whole of government level through the National Security Space Council, through the Department of Commerce, and even our Congress through the National Defense Authorization Act, to field and take advantage of and leverage commercial capabilities as rapidly as possible. Again, you're driving resiliency in every mission area, so we're not vulnerable to cheap shots and drive-bys and nosy neighbors and all those kinds of bad behaviors that typically go on right here on Earth. Oh, by the way, it's right, those same kinds of things are going on in space. And so we're taking in the Space Development Agency, the U.S. Space Force, the U.S. Air Force, all of your major services are taking deliberate action to incorporate more and more capabilities in a more disaggregated and dispersed manner.
Thank you. It's fascinating. I think we've got some Q&A we're eventually going to have to get to.
Yes. I want to touch on one quick thing. It sounds like there's no doubt about the massive need for these satellites. I'd love to kind of touch on another slight issue surrounding them. What about the nature, about how they're being impacted by the global supply chain and domestic production? I know we're seeing a lot of problems with the supply chain in recent months and years, and what it means to kind of work in government contracts with regards to building products domestically. Marc, could I pass that one to you?
Sure. We are no different as we've been hit by the shortage of chips and the shutdown and restart of many of our suppliers. We're very lucky that we manufacture 85% of our components in-house. We build over 65 modules for our satellites, and we look at them as Legos. We just mix and match as we build our satellites. But we're continuing to vertically integrate. We continue to buy up our supply chain, guarantee us our ability. So the next 3 years, we'll own 100% of our supply chain. We'll vertically integrate, with the exception of solar panels that we use, which we get from Lockheed Martin, where we have a strategic cooperation agreement with them. And so we're very, very cognizant. We were lucky in one aspect that we didn't have to close during COVID. We were considered part of the national interest, and so we stayed open the whole time, and thankfully everybody stayed safe. But we were impacted just like everybody else. But that impact is getting smaller and smaller as every day goes on, as we get more and more control over our supply chain.
I'll just mention, as a hedge fund manager, investment guy, not necessarily space related, but somewhat still defense related, certainly, Intel has become my biggest position in the last few weeks or month, for a lot of different reasons, but including the fact that Taiwan Semiconductor in Taiwan is at risk. Taiwan's at risk. Watching Ukraine and Russia, there's parallels to China, China and Taiwan, and Tesla, Apple, my phone, my car, the ships, the helicopters that the Department of Defense uses, all use chips from Taiwan Semiconductor. And you're going to talk about supply chain issues. Besides space over the next 5 or 10 years, with the development of this Russian breakout, the Europe crisis, these tensions happening, I think we've ended the liberalized, globalized economy paradigm that I've spent my lifetime investing in. And my baseline assumptions of the way the world works, I think changed, supply chains included, and there's going to be a major multi-trillion-dollar movement of domesticating all supply chains, from plastics to metals to rare earth minerals to developed finished goods to premiums.
And you know what, you are so right on so many levels about Intel, because we look at it as a defense contractor, and with cybersecurity being such an issue nowadays, we are not allowed to buy chips offshore. We have to buy things that were built and made here in America, because everything now that the Chinese have put code in it, they could see into it. And so Intel is a tremendous bet, because it has to be, this whole, America lost its ability to manufacture things. We all got used to buying everything from China, and and we funded China, and we have to realize we need to build everything. We need to come back to our roots. Remember, they used to have "Made in America" was that slogan that they had for years, and we have to get back to that. We need to create, after COVID, we need to create jobs. And the last thing we wanted to do was to see the DoD spending money buying things from companies that are based offshore, owned by foreign entities. They should be focused on spending money here in America today.
Well, and Mark, but even to the point, you don't know that you'll be able to get it. If China invades Taiwan, it's very possible that they one day go, you know what, we don't sell chips to America anymore. And then it doesn't matter how much they cost, or if it was Chinese and it's got secret code that's tracking stuff, you're not even going to be able to put it in your satellites or in your car. And that is something that, it hit real when COVID hit and the supply chain disruptions happened and inflation started creeping in the economy broadly. But the Ukraine-Russian invasion and China's lack of participating in the liberalized world's reaction to this, I was already starting to really get into Intel before this. Yeah. And, the supply chains themselves, from chips to everything, have to come onshore. I think that is a major movement. Space will actually, by the way, help all of that, help supply chains manage themselves, help track where things are. The Internet of Things from space will know that your new chip, your new phone is on that ship that's coming over from probably not China, maybe Mexico, something. Anyway, let's hop into Q&A, because we're running long, I think.
Yeah, if there's nothing else at all, I'd love to just hop into some of the questions that we got throughout the session. So we got a question about how long, so about these small satellites, how long will these small satellites exist in orbit? What is the lifespan of a single satellite before it needs to be retired?
So there are lots of kinds of small satellites. The ones in low Earth orbit last about 5 years, and that's because they're not radiation hardened. So the sun will beat up on the batteries, radiation from the sun. So we say it's got a 5-year lifespan. Can they last 6, 7, 8 years? Absolutely. But we tell people 5 years is their minimum lifespan that they're going to survive. And the good part is, what used to cost, like I said earlier, what used to cost $1 billion now costs 10 million. So it's still cheaper to replace that satellite every 5 years. So no one ever thought of a manufacturing business before as a recurring revenue business. And that's really what we are. We're a recurring revenue business, because once we get a customer, we got to keep replacing their satellites for the next 25 years. So,
and Mark, I think most satellite companies at this point, if they don't, there's a lot of low Earth orbit satellite companies out there, right? Several publicly traded, and some of them say that their satellites should last more than 5 years. And that is a major red flag, because number one, it probably won't. And number two, the technologies in 5 years will be such that you'll want to replace your satellites that you sent up 5 years ago. Right. I was pulling up my phone for the same reason, right? 5-year recurring, maybe 3 to 5 year recurring purchase price of recurring revenue. I buy my new phone.
How many
General?
Right. How many listeners on the call today have a phone older than 5 years?
I bet very few. Very few.
And that's exactly consistent with the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, with the United States government intent as well, is to replenish these constellations, to keep them current, to take advantage of Moore's law, and continue to evolve technologically and the baseline performance of these systems.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a kind of technical question here about some of the companies on the call. So someone asked, can you clarify the sequence of business flow? From my understanding, Terran Orbital is a private startup acquired by TWNT and now going IPO. So can someone, Marc, probably clarify kind of the flow there and what's going on?
Well, I guess I should clarify. So last fall, Terran Orbital reached an agreement to merge with Tailwind 2, which today trades under the ticker TWNT. Tailwind 2 is a special purpose acquisition company, otherwise known as a SPAC, which you hear about. And if and when the transaction closes, the shares of TWNT will be exchanged for shares in our company, Terran Orbital, which will be with Tailwind 2. So I hope that kind of maybe clarifies how that all comes together. And we'll have a new stock symbol called LLAP post de-SPAC.
And I would think most people watching this have probably been around a SPAC in the last year. It was hard to not be involved at some point in the last year. There was you couldn't stand on the corner of Wall Street and not get in the head with a SPAC.
But SPACs have gotten a bad rap. The reality is, you can do an IPO, you can do a direct listing, or you can do a SPAC. And a SPAC gives you the highest likelihood and likely chance to close. Like if we tried to do an IPO 2 weeks ago, it would have been a market out. The Dow was having a horrible day. The book would have evaporated before the market opened, and we never would have gone public. With a SPAC, you're going to go public. But the problem is you have a lot of companies merging into SPACs today that never should be public. And that's true with some of you who've gone to space and a lot of other industries. They're too small. We're a real company with real revenues, a real backlog. We just added $170 million of contracts and awards we announced, I think, a week and a half ago to our backlog. I mean, we have an amazing management team of people like Roger on board and a lot of his compatriots. We're a very purpose-built company. But a lot of these startups have merged into SPACs, and that's given SPACs kind of a bad name. So we try to avoid. We think of SPAC as a four-letter word and avoid it, and we just think of it as we're going public, and we're capital intensive. If you look at what we're building in Florida, we're building what will be the world's largest satellite assembly facility, 660,000 square feet of space, almost a kilometer long from end to end. You can go to terranorbital.com and see pictures of it, image renderings of it. And it's being paid for by the state of Florida, the Space Florida, $300 million they're putting up for it. And we'll be able to produce 1,000 satellites a year from that facility alone. And we're not stopping there. We just added another facility in Irvine, California, where we're building another 60,000 square feet. We're going to continue to add more space and continue to grow as demand continues to pick up.
Great, yeah, thank you for that. We have a few other questions, even just more about the satellites. Is there anything else we wanted to cover on Terran and Tailwind before we? No,
let's answer people's questions. Let's see what we can get out. It's all about them today.
Yeah, so we have an interesting question here about like the use cases for the satellites, and if the police department could even use them to track movements and different things like that, or if that kind of data is too small to effectively capture.
Not necessarily today, but in 5 years, I mean, yes, the surveillance state will get worse as space capabilities increase.
But there are a lot of laws here in the U.S. to protect people's privacy from space. It's interesting. So we can watch everybody in the streets in Moscow, but you can't do it here in the U.S. It's a lot of protections to protect people's privacy here in the United States. So, but this is all to protect people in the United States from outsiders. Think of it that way. Did I got that right, Roger?
You do, Marc. That's exactly right.
I'm a little more cynical about it than the other two guys on the board, but yes, I think there certainly are protections, but the capabilities will be there, and a lot of people will break rules, including police.
But Cody, I would give a nod though to the regulatory environment, specifically being enabled by the Department of Commerce towards commercial space companies. It's eased quite a bit, and it's made our lives much easier to be able to do business. and pursue these kinds of opportunities that we see. We're very, very grateful for that. We monitor it closely and have great working relationships with them, to make sure that we're doing exactly what you're insinuating here and making sure we're in compliance.
Amen.
And that
Thank
we're, in accordance with our licensing, right, and the overall operation.
Great.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, here's another question. Do you see the satellite manufacturing sector becoming similar to the automotive sector in terms of the number of suppliers, or will it be vertically integrated by a few actors?
There'll be a lot of consolidation. We've already seen a lot of consolidation. So we used to have a lot of competitors. Raytheon bought one of our competitors, Blue Canyon. Boeing bought another one of our competitors, Millennium. And like the Borg, they got assimilated and disappeared. And so there's a lot of consolidation going on, but we are building Industry 4.0 manufacturing facilities. We're working towards fully robotic, additive manufacturing, augmented reality. We have kids wearing headsets now where they can actually look and put together a satellite. If you know how to use an Xbox, I could put you on an assembly line in 30 minutes and have you start building a satellite. It's pretty amazing technology. And we're continuing we continue to evolve our products. So we're always innovating, and unlike the car industry, a car is still a car, 100 years later, it's still got four wheels doing the same thing. We're trying to do much different things every day. And we try to come up with new ideas and new, what we call payloads, what the satellite does from space, new things we can do from space and new problems on the Earth we can solve from space.
I would just say, by the way, that cars are about to start driving themselves. Like my Tesla will at least come to the front of the store if I call for it. And I don't think that cars did that 10 or 20 years ago. I am teasing you a little bit there, Mark. But I would say, by the way, look, I think Mark's totally right. There will be a lot of consolidation, but there are also going to be thousands of startups related to space that are coming into the market over the next 5 or 10 years. Hundreds of those will come public in the next 5 or 10 years, and dozens of those will be worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and a handful of those will be worth trillions of dollars.
But it's great that you're talking about cars driving themselves. So we actually have been doing we've been doing AI in space for quite a long time. And so we have satellites now in space. We have drones in space, autonomous vehicles in space. And we have a program now that we're working on where 2 satellites will go find each other in space autonomously, and they're going to dock with each other, and they're going to undock, do some maneuvers, and they're going to find each other again. Now imagine a needle in a haystack, except the haystack's bigger than planet Earth. And they've got these 2 objects that are this big, have to find each other and meet up and hook up to connect to each other autonomously with no help from humans on the ground.
It almost sounds like 2 crows or ravens. And will those 2 satellites then forever have a bond? And what will their children look like, Mark?
Lots of little satellites.
You talk about a CubeSat, we're getting little baby CubeSats. And why wouldn't that happen? By the way, I'm just picturing that. I've never really thought about the fact that why wouldn't my daughter likes Pringles, so I happen to have one on my desk here. So why wouldn't in 5 or 10 years, some satellites, you could have a constellation, you could send up 3,000 of these in one Falcon 9 ship and have an entire constellation of Pringles satellites.
You laugh, people actually are thinking about this. This is real world stuff you're talking about. You're ahead of the curve here. You were way ahead of the curve, Cody, just saying.
General J. Raymond makes reference to a Russian satellite that basically follows the exact concept that you're describing here, Cody, and that it's a nesting doll kind of satellite. Is suddenly they thought there was one launch, and then lo and behold, there became 2, 3, 4 satellites coming out of that single vehicle, and so those kinds of concepts and ideas are already actually in work.
See, that's what I mean. I'm not smart enough to have thought of them yet. I just came up because I saw the Pringle box on my desk right now.
Yeah, you got me thinking about Pringles right now.
We need to build a Pringles. We need to build a Pringles NFT in space now. So if Pringles is watching this, think about it, a Pringles NFT in space.
All right, let's wrap up with one more question. We were talking about smaller and smaller satellites. So we had a question saying, what about beyond low Earth orbit? Are there opportunities for those small satellites beyond low Earth orbit? And what are some examples?
So we do everything from a very low Earth orbit to we have 2 satellites going to the moon shortly. We're going to be mapping the moon with infrared, and we're going to be helping to build a comm system for the first lunar base. And those 2 will be launching this year. And so we go, and we're working with, now we're working on ideas for deep space missions to Mars. We have a lot of things on the books. It's very exciting. All the things.
And Mark, those satellites that you're picturing sending to Mars over the next several years, CubeSat size?
No,
size? What are we talking about?
No, we built most of our satellites are now the size of a small fridge to the main refrigerator in your kitchen. Is predominantly what we build. We haven't built a CubeSat in quite a few years now.
In 5 years, though, is the trend
they've
going?
They've been getting bigger, but that's not because you need more electricity and more power. CubeSats demonstrated that it was doable, but to make it really practical, you need to be in that 150 to 500 kilogram weight to really make it. You have enough electricity and enough batteries on board to do something.
Cool.
Thank you. Okay, General Teague, please.
No, I was just going to say that today, hopefully we will continue to see advancements in technology, and we can drive them smaller and smaller, but he's exactly right. That's where we are today. And obviously we're going to keep pushing the envelope.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are primed to do that. Well, we're almost out of time. I want to just thank you guys so much for your willingness to hop on in this discussion. Is there any last things you want to add, Mark or anyone else?
I just want to say thank you for having us. Great. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone's time. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today on this podcast. Really great to have everybody on board. Thank you.
Yep. And we have some final questions about how people can get involved, invest. We'll send out a follow-up email as well with all of the relevant information. So thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Kelly, for moderating us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, General Teague. Thank you, Cody.
Thank you all
Wonderful
very
having
much.
you.
Thanks, General.
Terrific.
And thank you, Kelly.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.